This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi.
You have to follow the evidence. That's what Attorney Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, former attorney general, had to say recently about the Ellen Greenberg case when questioned by Brian Enton of News Nation during a press conference.
When you're in the role of being a prosecutor, you have to follow the evidence. And we never saw any evidence to suggest anything different. And then we shared the case with another district attorney, and they found the same.
I'm just curious, what were you guys looking at? Because, I don't know, somebody stabbing themselves 20 times, including after they're dead, post-mortem, seems to be some evidence. I mean, that's just a little piece of the evidence here. I mean, just a little bit. You got to follow the evidence. That's what you said. A real gem of a statement, considering we're talking about a case where evidence was thrown out like last night's trash, ignored, and outright contradicted by reality, and yet somehow we're still calling Ellen Greenberg's death a suicide. Let's take a second to really marinate on that logic. Ellen Greenberg, who is she? She's a 27-year-old. She was a 27-year-old. Found collapsed in her own kitchen, a knife lodged in her chest, having suffered a staggering 20 stab wounds. Let that number sink in for a second. 20, not 1, not 2, not 10, 20 separate stab wounds, including 10 to the back of her neck and head. Because, that's what people usually do when they want to end their own life. They repeatedly stab themselves in the back of the neck after they're dead. Yet, Josh, you say we need to follow the evidence. Great idea. We're going to do exactly that. 20 stab wounds, remember. Post-mortem, meaning when you're dead. She'd have to have become a zombie, basically, if we're going to follow the evidence that you claim exists. Right, Josh? Is that?
And we looked at every possible angle. There's nothing I wanted more than to give these parents some finality, some answers, some clarity. And we received more evidence, more information during the course of our investigation that sadly didn't show what they wanted it to show, but actually rather pointed to more data, more information that pointed toward a suicide.
Okay, let's just say that that's true for a moment. Let's go through the evidence. Let's follow the evidence. And you tell me, Josh, if that data still points to a suicide, okay? I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not accusing anyone of murder. I'm going to say that very clearly right off the bat. I'm saying I'm following the evidence like Josh Shapiro says we should do. So when a medical examiner looks at a body covered in stab wounds, including some in places that are nearly impossible to self-inflict, and after you stab yourself in the spinal column and sever your spinal cord, you're not going to be able to move anymore either. You may not be quite dead yet, but you can't keep stabbing. What do they conclude? Homicide, right? That's, of course. You can't stab yourself after you're dead, and you can't stab yourself after you've been incapacitated. That's a homicide. It's exactly what Dr. Marlon Osborne, the medical examiner, did in his initial report. He looked at Ellen's wounds, took in the scene, and made the rational, professional conclusion that this was a murder. That ruling lasted about a day. Then suddenly, after a private meeting with police and prosecutors, that decision magically just changed to suicide. What new forensic discoveries led to this about-face? What groundbreaking evidence flipped this from murder to a self-inflicted tragedy? Oh, that's right. None. Nothing. No new tests, no new reports, no new autopsy results, just a closed-door meeting amongst some folks that may have some power, that may not want this to be a homicide. You want us to believe that's following the evidence, Josh? Okay, well, let's keep following the evidence, like you say. Let's talk about the crime scene, shall we? The one where police allowed a cleanup crew in before a proper forensic examination was completed. Oh, wait, they didn't even want a proper forensic examination. They just said suicide, 20 stab wounds, post-mortem, must be. Investigators failed to properly test DNA or fingerprints on the knife lodged in Ellen's chest. The apartment door, which was supposedly kicked in, that's in the report, by her fiancé, Sam Goldberg. It showed minimal damage, inconsistent with forced entry. Have you ever seen a door latch? And if you kick it in, I challenge you, I would love to see someone who can kick in that door, break it open, break into that room, and not have either the latch on the door or the frame ripped apart, or at the very least, hanging there. Oh, wait, there's no evidence of that. Oh, and the story that the doorman came up and watched this happen, the doorman says it never happened. He wasn't there. He was not there to witness the forced entry into this apartment that was supposedly locked from the inside because the fiancé said that was true. Must be, right? No one would ever make up anything at a crime scene or say anything that's inconsistent with reality. That never happens. No. I'm not saying the fiancé has anything to do with this, but I'm just saying it doesn't make sense. And some questions need to be answered if that's the story. Following the evidence. That's what we're doing, following the evidence. When things don't make sense, we have to follow the evidence. How about the bloodstain analysis? Later revealed her body had been moved, which also contradicted Goldberg's claim that he found her slumped over. There was undigested food in Ellen's stomach, meaning she had eaten something shortly before she died, yet no forensic timeline was established to determine an accurate time of death. There was no suicide note, no preventive or previous suicide attempts, no history of self-harm, and her own psychiatrist said that she was not suicidal. The story that people like to push out there, including Sam, mental health, depression, all that stuff, it's real. Of course it is. Yes, of course it is. People do kill themselves. Stabbing yourself 20 times after you're dead as well, that's not real. That's just not real. I know what is real, but that's not real. You can, of course, people do that, but that's not real. At least one of the stab wounds was determined to be post-mortem, meaning it was inflicted after she had already died. Blood flow patterns did not match her final position, suggesting her body was moved. The lack of defensive wounds, despite 20 stab wounds, raises serious doubts as well. That's the kind of sloppy corner-cutting nonsense that gets a case thrown out of Law & Order in the first 5 minutes. But in Philadelphia with this one, this is how it works. Following the evidence. Josh, tell us again how we need to follow the evidence.
We transferred it to the Chester County District Attorney, if memory serves me. They looked at it for a couple of years, and they found the same determination as well. There was no evidence there that supported a homicide. There was no evidence there that supported any sort of criminal charges against anyone else. And they closed the case.
Of course they did. Well, it took him years to get through that. We're gonna get through this in like 15 minutes. And you may have a little more information than they did, I guess. Let's talk about Judge James Schwartzman, one of the most respected legal minds in Pennsylvania, a man who built his career on judicial ethics, a guy who, in theory, should be the last person to insert himself into an active investigation in a way that even smells like a conflict of interest. And yet, within 24 hours of Ellen's death, there he was, magically, at the crime scene, removing potential evidence. He wasn't doing it without police permission. They said, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, and he happens to be a relative of the ex-fiancé. Oh, and he was on the phone. The ex-fiancé was on the phone before calling 911 with him and his other attorney, family member as well. Schwartzman's, who just happens to be the uncle of Ellen's fiance, walked into that apartment before police had completed their work and collected laptops, phones, and other belongings. Why? Well, according to him, he just wanted to keep them safe. You know, in case someone stole them from the unguarded crime scene that police had bizarrely abandoned. Like you do. Following the evidence, Josh. We're following the evidence. Totally normal. Nothing suspicious or weird here. Just a high-ranking judge swooping in to gather evidence before investigators could process it. And when Ellen's parents asked how this is allowed, how did somebody go in and take this stuff? Why did police let them? Oh, well, it turns out police said go for it. Because, hey, why let actual law enforcement handle an active crime scene when a family member of a potential suspect is willing to do the job for them? Thank you. Thanks for coming in, Judge. You saved the day. But again, Josh, you say we should follow the evidence. So let's keep following the evidence, okay? Not saying where it takes us. I'm going to let you guys decide that. I'm not saying anybody's responsible here. Somebody clearly is. But I'm not going to name any names. I'm not going to say who or anything like that. I'm just going to say follow the evidence. That's what we're going to keep doing. Keep following the evidence. You seem to have a lot of difficulty doing. Ellen's injuries included bruises in various stages of healing, suggesting prior abuse. Yet no one seemed to care about that. You find a woman stabbed 20 times in her apartment. Looks like there's bruises that are healing from possible prior abuse. Again, following the evidence, Josh. One of her stab wounds was determined to be post-mortem, meaning it was already, or she was already dead when it was inflicted. So how exactly does a dead woman stab herself, Josh? Trying to follow the evidence here, Josh. It's not making a lot of sense. Bloodstains on her face ran in the wrong direction of how her body was supposedly found, meaning someone moved her after she had already started bleeding. Her injuries were not consistent with any known case of suicide by stabbing, especially considering the number of stab wounds and placement of the wounds specifically. You know, like where you sever your spinal column, you get into that spinal cord and you basically render yourself incapacitated. There's a stab wound like that. But apparently, she's a zombie. She's able to keep going, and when she's dead, come back and stab herself again. Following the evidence. No psychological evidence supports the idea of suicide, yet authorities refuse to reconsider the ruling. And the ex-fiancé says, you know, depression is real. I'm just paraphrasing here. I just want to be accurate on that. You know, mental health crises, they're real. People do kill themselves. I 1,000% agree. And it's a horrible thing, and we need more attention to it. But no matter how depressed you are, no matter what you're suffering from, it doesn't give you the ability to stab yourself after you're already dead. Or after you sever your spinal cord. That'd be fucking amazing, but that's not real. We're not talking about The Walking Dead. Josh, we're following the evidence. I hope you're following along. The official ruling still remains suicide. And Josh, I have to ask, at what point did following the evidence turn into completely ignoring it? I'm not saying this was an outright cover-up, but if it were, let's just say this is exactly how you do it. Get the medical examiner to reverse his homicide ruling with no forensic justification, let law enforcement botch the crime scene investigation so badly that no airtight case can be made later, allow a well-connected judge to waltz in and take potential evidence before investigators can secure it because the investigators said go for it. Stick to the story so hard that even when dozens of independent forensic experts call the suicide ruling impossible, not just a different opinion, impossible, you just keep pretending it all makes sense. It's like you did last week. And when Ellen's parents refuse to accept it, well, they're grieving. You want nothing more than to bring them justice and closure, right? Right. when they spend years demanding answers, when forensic experts, journalists, and the public all point to the mountain of contradictions, just repeat the same tired line. You have to follow the evidence. Josh, we just did. Come on. We're following the evidence. We've been following it for years. It doesn't lead to a suicide. It doesn't even come close. And your medical examiner, who originally said homicide and then said suicide, is now saying something other than suicide again. What it actually leads to here is a failure of the justice system so staggering, it would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic. Ellen Greenberg deserves better. Her parents deserve better, and frankly, so do we. So how about just this once? We actually follow the evidence all the way to the truth. Sound like a good idea there, Josh? Yeah, I think it is too.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.